deck. So we're getting into the game right now, and we actually see Strifecro, who is on the bottom of the screen.
It looks like
he's playing, in fact, Patron Warrior.
And one thing I'd like to point out is, for those of you who actually watch Strifecro stream, he has been practicing this deck quite a bit. It is a deck that in the past he's really not played all that much of, but I guess he's finally realized that how powerful of a deck it is, that he's kind of just conceded in terms of now he just accepts it, that he has to play it in tournaments.
Yeah, Strifecro actually was talking a bit recently. He was playing in the qualifier event, and he did not play the BlizzCon qualifiers. He did not play Patron Warrior, and he's like, "Why did I do this?" he sort of just played all the rest. He's like, "I just played nothing but tier 2 decks."
Exactly. He played very well, but the problem was it's hard to have those decks compete with tier 1 decks like Patron Warrior.
And if you look at these two players' lineups, actually, Strifecro clearly playing Patron Warrior, playing in this game, in fact, while Dog actually doesn't have Warrior at all. He's chosen to bring Priest, Mage, and Druid. He's clearly in this game playing the Mage deck, playing Tempo Mage, and this is a deck that Dog actually likes quite a bit and has had a great deal of success with. This was a deck that was in his lineup for the BlizzCon Last Call tournament that brought him to a great degree of success.
Now, we know that Dog is one of kind of the very big innovators of the Druid deck, so it's no surprise to see him playing that. However, after talking with him yesterday, he was talking about how he really likes to play decks that are unexpected. He wants to switch things up. He wants to avoid the 50-50 mirror matches of what he thinks his opponents are going to play in terms of actually just playing something completely different, hoping he can gain an advantage in that sense.
It's definitely an interesting thing. In Hearthstone, because you are playing 3 decks in any given match, the sort of surprise factor that you can get out of having an unexpected deck, particularly in an event like this where all the players are really here watching their potential competitors. So you could only gain so much edge from having a deck that it may be a little bit unexpected. But here in this first opening series, this is where you could get that advantage.
Exactly, and we see here that Strifecro actually has quite a few options on already in turn 3. He has 4 minions that cost 3 mana, which obviously the War Song is not a minion you want to drop in this position. Probably not the Frothing Berserker either.
I mean, this is an interesting thing. One of the things that you want to do as the player who's playing against Patron Warrior is put them in a position where they need to use their combo pieces to defend themselves, basically. And here we see Strifecro drop the Frothing Berserker on turn 3. In a lot of matchups, that's a card that you want to wait and hold on to until the very late stages of the game so you can set up that big board with Whirlwind effects and Warsong Commander and get that one-turn kill. But here, and this is the surprise factor of Unstable Portal coming in. The Defender of Argus actually buffs both of Dog's minions big enough that either of them can actually kill that Frothing Berserker in one hit.
Exactly. So if Strifecro actually deciding to pass on the opportunity to use Whirlwind to wipe off both minions on the field, now allow Dog to use that Unstable Portal Defender of Argus in order to kind of take back or continue to take control of this game. The question right now is whether or not he wants to just go straight face or to trade into this Frothing Berserker, possibly being scared of a large burst OTK later by keeping it alive.
And it looks like Dog has decided he is just pushing for damage, and I like that. I like the sort of lack of respect for the Frothing Berserker there. Strifecro would need to basically have like multiple Whirlwind effects or weapon slammed in order to get through both those and keep his Frothing around. And Dog recognizes that his road to victory here is putting on pressure and keeping Strifecro from being able to get to the point where he is able to assemble his big combos.
Absolutely. So taking a look at Dog's following turn, right now I think it's Strifecro trying to decide which minion he's going to trade off on. Obviously, because of the board pressure, he has to kill one of these minions, either the Sorcerer's Apprentice or the Mana Worm. Which one do you think you would prefer in this situation? It's
interesting because the Sorcerer's Apprentice is a card that enables potential big plays from Dog. For instance, if Dog had Fireball, Frostbolt, with the Sorcerer's Apprentice, he could actually cast both of them on 4 mana next turn. That would also pump the Mana Worm 2 points of attack, so it could do a lot of damage, but that actually leaves Dog unable to actually play both those spells. So here he could potentially play Fireball, kill perhaps the Inventor, or just go face. But if he did have the Sorcerer's Apprentice in play, he'd be able to do far more things, which I think is a bigger danger than a couple extra points of damage.
Now, I would not be surprised if Dog actually decides to trade in this Mad Scientist here, along with using the Defender of Argus to kill off the 2/4. Just so that, 1, he gets a secret on board, but 2, so that he pulls the secret out of his deck so he actually doesn't draw it in future turns. It thins out your deck, so that way his future draws will be more efficient in terms of not getting a mirror entity. It's not the card you want to see in your hand, especially 2 of.
Mirror Entity, definitely a card that actually in some cases players have even been removing from their Tempo Mage decks. It's a card that in a matchup like this can in some cases even be a drawback. If you have a significant board presence and you end up with a Mirror Entity in play and your opponent plays, say, Unstable Ghoul, that can not only put them in a situation where they are able to neutralize your Mirror Entity, but also potentially make a bunch of patrons or even just wipe out your board with the Unstable Ghoul effect.
But we saw there that Dog, they kind of look a little bit like, but so he actually decided to go face, I think because he had the Fireball in hand. That's exactly what I was trying to say. But he put Strifecro at 14 health. This does set up lethal for the following turn.
I mean, with that Fireball in hand and this significant board presence, he is putting Strifecro in a position where he has to do something really powerful and right now. It looks like Strifecro is just dropping the Acolyte of Pain, taking out the Mana Worm. That leaves 6, 7, 8 plus 6, 14, so not quite lethal with that Fireball, but very, very close.
But here's what I was mentioning earlier. Dog ended up actually drawing that other Mirror Entity, which he did not want to get.
Yeah, it's certainly a position that Dog does not want to be in, potentially having that Mirror Entity as... I mean, it's interesting because Dog could play Mirror Entity here, and Mirror Entity's on most of Strifecro's minions actually quite strong. If he Mirror Entities and is able to stop Strifecro from being able to play something like a Grim Patron, which he might want to set up with Whirlwind, or potentially just anything that can keep Strifecro off of being able to actually defend himself here. Because Strifecro is so low that even though this Mirror Entity isn't likely to be a particularly high value, what really matters is the pace of the game and the rate at which Strifecro's life total is being depleted.
Absolutely. So what do you expect from Strifecro coming out here? Obviously he does have the shield block, which will put him at a little bit of a higher life total. But is it enough to actually get him out of Dog's lethal range with that Fireball in hand?
I think if you're in Strifecro's position, you basically have to just be like, okay, I can't play around burn spells. He's so far behind. Ooh, a second shield block. That is potentially able to put him up to a reasonably safe life total, but it also does mean that he's not actually able to do anything to interact with the board this turn, and he is already very far behind.
So right now, Strifecro obviously just wants to live until his turn 8. By having that Warsong Commander Patron, he has the ability to not only take back board control from the majority of a Tempo Mage's minions on board, but he actually builds his own board up with just a flurry of patrons. So it's just a survival game at this point, and to not get overrun before that turn 8.
I mean, Strifecro is just—he's trying to stay alive, trying to hang out as long as he can, and not get burned out. Not clear that it's going to work out for him. He's able to, Dog is able to get in 8 more damage just with his board this turn.
Do you expect him to actually just use the Fireball at this point in order to push that a little bit extra damage? That way he can put a free Antonidas, not only for the potential effect, but the fact that it's a 5/7 minion that Strifecro has to have execute to get rid of?
Just the body of Antonidas, as you're saying, is quite relevant here. And I think it looks like he's just going to take out the Acolyte of Pain. That does prevent Strifecro from being able to use the Acolyte to get some damage on a minion and potentially execute it. And Strifecro's still he's at 9 life. He's already used both of his shield blocks, so Dog knows that at best, he can try and set up a big turn with Armorsmith and Whirlwind, but with only 7 mana, he can't do anything with that involves both Grim Patron and Armorsmith and anything besides Inner Rage. So he cannot do anything that's going to really generate a lot of bodies and keep him alive.
So here's one of the issues right now. I think his only way to come back from this is to kill the Shredder into a Doomsayer, have a little bit of luck with that, but the problem is if he hits with his weapon into that Shredder, the Fireball ping will kill him the following turn. So his only option is to either use the Whirlwind, the Inner Rage, to activate that Shredder into an Execute, and then get a Doomsayer.
Is Inner Rage to potentially test for Counterspell here? Whirlwind, this I think is actually a play to try and potentially beat Effigy. He wants to kill the smaller minions while he can, in case Dog has Effigy. And this is actually one of the things that's a pretty significant detail of who do you play against in your first match. Because now we've seen that Dog has played Mirror Entity, and his Scientist has died and he's gotten no secret. So now everyone in the future games knows, okay, that there's no secrets except for those 2 coming out of his deck. Strifecro didn't know that, and he had to play around them. So we were talking a little bit about the surprise factor before, but it looks like nothing Strifecro can do can actually put him back into that game, surprise factor or not. And Dog does take a 1-game lead with his Tempo Mage deck, defeating Strifecro's Patron Warrior.
And nonetheless, it was against a Patron Warrior, which is one deck that people do talk about as the reigning deck currently in the Hearthstone meta. But because of that, a lot of people are actually making sure they bring decks that have at least a decent matchup with Patron Warrior. So it's one of those situations where you bring the best deck, but then you know that every single deck you're playing against at that point in time will have a chance against yours.
Right, looks like so. If you are in Dog Seat or Strifecro Seat, which deck are you looking to play here? We did see that Tempo Mage deck, which, as you mentioned, clearly a deck that players will bring in part because of its strong matchup against Patron Warrior. Now, what do you think? Oh, well, we know now, but
exactly. So I was actually going to say that based on past statistics that I've done, that I've talked to other people who have done, the majority of players in Hearthstone and the Conquest format seem to actually keep the same deck going into Game 2 if they lost. So based on that, Dog had to either choose between Druid or Priest, and if he kind of went by that logic, I'm guessing that he expects his Druid to have a better matchup than his Priest deck against a Patron Warrior.
I imagine that Dog's Priest deck is most likely Dragon Priest. That's generally accepted as the strongest version of Priest these days. And I do think that Druid is certainly a stronger deck against Patron, particularly than Dragon Priest, though Dragon Priest is actually no slouch against Patron either. We actually played in the Archon Team League, and every time in that tournament in the finale that Dragon Priest went up against Patron, it was actually the Dragon Priest deck that won.
Really?
Despite sort of the popular opinion being that that's a tough matchup, I think a lot of the assumptions regarding how that matchup goes are related to people's belief that Dragon Priest, just Priest decks in general, play reactively, when in reality, Dragon Priest, with the right draw, is actually able to put a lot of pressure on their opponent with very difficult to deal with minions.
Absolutely. Dragon Priest is a very mid-range board control heavy deck where it gets board control and it keeps buffing up his own minions, keeping them alive, and you can push so much damage in the face that the Patron Warrior may never even get an opportunity to use his Frothing Berserker OTK combo.
Yeah, that's the issue with a lot of Priest decks against decks like Patron is that because they do typically play fairly reactively, they do give the opponent a lot of time to actually get to the point where they are able to assemble those sort of combos. But here, Druid, definitely not a reactive deck. Druid is a deck that puts the pressure on.
So what do you think here about Dog's decision to use the Darnassus Aspirant over the Wild Growth Insane on turn 2?
It's kind of interesting because it is able to actually put some pressure on right now, and it does potentially force Strifecro to react on his turn, something like this Frothing Ghoul, which is a reasonable sort of stopgap against that Darnassus Aspirant. Mm-hmm. And we do see, because he is able to, with the Aspirant play, he can actually do exactly what he's doing here. Even against that Ghoul, he's able to cast the Wild Growth and get the Aspirant in to deal with that Ghoul and get it off the board.
Absolutely. I think that was actually a perfect out for Dog. He was obviously worried about a Fire War Axe, but he was probably playing off the fact that if Strifecro didn't have the Fire War Axe, he would get such a ramp, allowing him to do the move he did. Now, for the rest of the game, it seems as though Strifecro is going to be fighting to get back board, in which case is not something you want to do as the Patron Warrior. You want to get early board control, play like a zoo, get something that your Druid has to fight back on, and then finish him off with either a big Patron board or a big Frothing attack.
Yeah, as we were mentioning before regarding the dynamic between Patron and Priest and such, the key to beating Patron decks for a lot of decks is being able to actually keep that pressure on, being able to keep them on the back foot and force them to use their resources to react to you. When the Patron deck has all the time in the world, it's able to assemble all of its Battle Rage, card draw, and piece together all the various points of its combo. It's extremely difficult to beat because it is capable of doing these incredibly powerful things in the late game. But if you are able to force them to use both their mana and their resources to stop themselves from dying, you're able to get into a much better position.
Absolutely, and we see here one of the ways that Patron Warrior actually wants to go about the Druid matchup. Play like a zoo deck, just throw your minions out as a 3-mana 2/4, which obviously isn't ideal, but the Druid has no great way to deal with lots of medium, little-sized minions, other than the Swipe, Wraths, Force of Nature. But that takes up the entire Druid's turn, so once again, the Patron just continues to maintain that board initiative, and every turn it's a Druid the one that's fighting back, and that's the way they usually want to go about it.
Now Dog is actually put to an interesting decision whether he wants to use his Swipe here to actually eliminate the Frothing Berserker, or potentially use, say, Hero Power and Wrath, or potentially allow his opponent to kill his Darnassus Aspirant with that Berserker by playing his Sylvanas. It's sort of a weird spot because he wants to, as we were saying, remain proactive. If he does spend his entire turn killing that Frothing Berserker, and then his opponent is able to deal with his Darnassus Aspirant, then he can't play his Ancient next turn. Mm-hmm. But it looks like he does go with the Swipe. He wants to clear that Frothing Berserker before it is able to get out of hand.
Absolutely. And going on to Strifecro's turn 4, we do see that he does in fact have the Deathbite, which all he needs right now is that last card, the Grim Patron, to go along with the Whirlwind effect on top of the Inner Rage.
Yeah, the key card for the Patron deck against Druids specifically is Grim Patron. The ability to actually generate a board full of patrons is one of the biggest ways that the Grim Patron deck can actually beat most Druid decks. Druid decks can struggle, as you were mentioning, to deal with a board of multiple minions if they aren't one toughness minions, one health minions, because with those they can deal with it with Swipe. But a Grim Patron board, Swipe can actually be a drawback.
Absolutely.
If your opponent has Grim Patron and then a 2-health Grim Patron, well, you're just giving him more patrons if you cast that Swipe.
Now, going back to the previous turn, I want to point out that I love that Strifecro realized that he needs to kill off the Darnassus Aspirant. In general, Druids do not have that many turn 6 plays. So on turn 5, it might be okay leaving a 1-health Darnassus Aspirant on field because they're probably going to be playing a 5-mana minion anyways. However, going into Dog's 7 mana, he wants to stop that Dr. Womb. He wants to stop that Ancient Allure. 2 cards that can really swing this game completely in Dog's favor. By killing off that Aspirant, even though it only had 1 health with the Deathbite, stop Dog from being able to make a move like one of those.
Yeah, unfortunately for Strifecro, Dog did have one of the few 6-mana plays. He had that Sylvanas, which Strifecro was able to eliminate with the second charge of Deathbite. And now Strifecro is actually the one who has the board presence. That Frothing Berserker and Unstable Ghoul does give him a little bit of threat here. But Dog actually has a number of options himself. He can potentially just play this Ancient of Lore, pick up some extra cards. He's obviously at full health, won't use the heal ability. But that potentially can just go down to an Execute, and then it's possible that the Frothing Berserker gets big enough that it kind of starts to run away with the game.
And you do have to be worried about playing a Shade of Naxxramas right now, because when it does come out, it only has 2 health. And when you're facing down an Unstable Ghoul, which will have 1 Whirlwind effect, Strifecro could just have the other Whirlwind and be able to take it out just right there and then, not even let the Shade give it a chance to get big.
This is interesting. He chooses to go with the Wrath here and then just drops his Ghoul and Hero Powers up.
So I was going to say, I like that because now he actually got rid of one of the Whirlwind effects, so his Shade has a little bit more of a safety net. It's very unlikely that Strifecro is going to use double Whirlwind to wipe off the Shade of Naxxramas from the board.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, if he had chosen to play Ancient of Lore, it was threatening to actually kill the Unstable Ghoul, and then he would potentially be able to use that Wrath to kill Frothing Berserker. He also has Big Game Hunter in his hand, so if the Berserker gets really big, it's actually kind of a liability for Strifecro because he's able to remove it so effectively.
Exactly. So we'll be able to see whether Strifecro actually maneuvers the attack that his Frothing Berserker has in order to keep it out of that Big Game Hunter range.
I mean, an interesting point here is that now Strifecro, his Frothing Berserker goes down to the Shade, and that leaves him actually a little bit light on actual ways to win the game. Though here he picks up, as we were saying earlier, the best one with Grim Patron. And with double Inner Rage and Whirlwind in his hand, he has the ability to make a lot of patrons.
Exactly, and on top of that, he does kill off the Ancient Allure with his Execute to keep him out of the combo range, which is perfect. If he decided to go with the Patron play and didn't armor up and left that Ancient Allure on the board, he would actually die to the 21 damage combo with Force of Nature and Savage Roar.
Yeah, so we see Patron, Inner Rage, likely another Inner Rage, and then a Whirlwind. And this will, you see a little exasperation from Dog here. Oh, you got all of that, okay.
So I think this was one of the situations that Dog was absolutely dreading. He was in such a lead, especially with what Strifecro had in his hand. But with that one simple card, Strifecro may have not only come back, but is possibly just set to win this game from here on out.
I mean, now this game is really suddenly turned around, and this is one of the things that makes the Patron Warrior deck so powerful. It has a number of ways that it can really swing games in a single turn. Not only is it able to actually generate a huge board like this, but sometimes it just kills you in one turn.
Absolutely. So what do you think about Dog's decision here to use combo to wipe off the board versus maybe possibly trying to set up for a lethal kill with the Azure Drake into the Shade?
I think it's probably too dangerous to leave that board of that many patrons. You leave yourself extremely vulnerable to battle rage. You leave yourself vulnerable to your opponent just playing Armor Smith with that many minions on board. I think that Dog, in general, playing the Druid deck with a hand like this is pretty well set up to play a value game.
But now here with Strifecro actually top decking
the... If you see a swipe come up for Dog here, ooh, not a swipe. A swipe would have actually really swung this game right back in Dog's favor. Because of the spell power, swipe would have taken out the Emperor and both of those patrons. But now Dog's
one
actually
off
the
of
one
lethal range.
He's the one who is under a lot of pressure here.
So Strifecro just needs to find a way to top deck 1 damage. Any weapon, Inner Rage. Well, he actually already used both of his Inner Rages. Possibly a Cruel Taskmaster if he's running one in his deck.
And there's a Warstone Commander. He does have Slam in his hand, so he can slam one of Dog's minions and potentially draw any minion of his own with that Warstone Commander.
Let's see if he gets it. And that'll do it. The Cruel Taskmaster on its own. Don't even need the Warstone Commander to finish this game off.
He gets to have the rub-ins here by actually killing one of Dog's mana crystals. Takes down the Darnassus, adds insult to injury, and Strifecro takes the win with his Grim Patron deck against Dog's Druid deck to even the series up at 1-1.
I think that was a very well played game by both players. They knew what their position was on the board. They knew the matchup well enough to understand how to go about it. And it looked like Strifecro got the cards he needed in order to finish it off.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely a game that showcased all the various ways that the Patron Warrior deck can sort of come to dominate a game.
Absolutely.
We saw Strifecro using his resources early, playing his Frothing Berserkers just as minions, and then was able to finally assemble the combo with his Grim Patrons and just make an enormous board.
So we are getting into game number 3, where we are going to see Dog's Priest. Now, with the cards in hand, it's hard to determine if it is in fact a Dragon Priest, like you said it would probably be.
Yeah, I have to imagine that this is a Dragon Priest deck that looks very similar to most of those we typically see these days on the ladder or in tournaments. Shrinkmeister is a very strong card, not only as a way to potentially combo with Cabal Shadow Priest, but also just in a deck that's as minion focused as these modern Dragon Priest decks are. It can just be good as a combat focused minion.
Absolutely, and it used to be that Druid was one of the hard counters to Priest, but now the fact that Priest plays kind of a mid-range Zooey type deck, gets lots of minion on board, get a lot of value.
And this is exactly the sort of situation that is a nightmare for a Druid deck.
Absolutely.
We were talking in the last game about how difficult it can be for Druids to deal with large early minions, and this is exactly that. This Northshire Cleric, even with the 2 damage that it took from the Darnassus Aspirant, it's still a 3/5 minion on the second turn. And Dog has Powered Shield in his hand. He has the ability to take it even bigger, along with his hero power that can not only keep it alive, but also generate additional resources by the Northshire Cleric's ability.
Exactly. This is a Druid's worst nightmare when facing a Priest right now. For the Priest to get not only early board control, but to have a big minion board control, that gives him card draw too. Dog is at an astounding lead right now. I really cannot imagine how Strifecro, just from this point in time, finds a way to come back.
I mean, Druid has a lot of powerful things it can do if it is able to actually get the ramp effects that allow it to sort of play its bigger minions. We see Dr. Boom and Piloted Shredder in Strifecro's hand, but those are still several turns away from being relevant. And he can play the Darnassus Aspirant, it'll just die.
Exactly, and I think it's the person who I think put it best was Firebat one time. He explained how Druid loves to play unfair. And by that, they means they get the Wild Growth, they get the ramps through the Darnassus Aspirant, they get the Innervate, while a Priest is a deck that likes to play fair. They'll do 1 card at a time, they'll follow their curve, they'll take advantage of what minions they have on board. But by stopping the unfairness of the Druid, by not even giving Strifecro the chance with that Darnassus Aspirant, the Priest is just going to take the lead and continue to dominate the board. And
I don't know if that I would describe exactly what's happening to Strifecro now as fair, but Strifecro does pick something up with the silence effect of Keeper of the Grove, able to neutralize the Valence Chosen and the card draw ability of the Northshire Cleric. And as we were talking about before, Dog does use the Shrinkmeister just sort of as a tempo play. He wants to get on board. This is the way that these sort of games go. It's key to have the early board pressure, keep the Druid on the back foot so they aren't able to use the big advantages they can pick up from cards like Ancient of Lore as the game goes long. Don't give them time to get to the point where they can win the game with Force of Nature Savage Roar.
Absolutely. This game is perfectly showcasing one of Druid's main weaknesses is how you want to go about beating them. You throw a lot of the mid-range little minions on board. It's how you play against it as Patron, how you play against it as Priest, how you want to win as Tempo Mage, how you want to play against it as Zoo. The Druid doesn't have all that great of comeback cards. The Swipe, Force of Nature, those help, but it requires you to use your entire turn to possibly wipe either 1, 2, maybe 3 minions off your opponent's board. It's not an easy thing to come back from here as a Druid's perspective.
Yeah. As a Druid, what you want to be doing is using cards like Swipe and Wrath to keep your tempo advantage that you have gained by cards like Wild Growth or Innervate or Dornest Aspirant. But here, we see Strifecro. He did just pick up a Swipe, but right now Swipe doesn't do that much to this board. I mean, it is his best way to try and sort of get back into this game. He's able to take out the Shrinkmeister, do some damage to the other minions, but it's actually just not even that powerful here. Dog still has a strong board presence. He has that Northshire Cleric that if he wants, he can sort of revitalize his team and pick up some extra cards.
So what do you think about Dog's turn right here? He has the option to play the Northshire Cleric and continue his card draw cycling, or he could throw out actually one of his bigger minions, particularly one of the 2 Blackwing Corruptors in his hand, in order to put a little face damage onto Strifecro and get develop the 5/4 minion on board.
I think that right now, if we look at the board state and the health totals for each of the players, Dog really is in a position where he actually kind of wants to not just push tempo, because he doesn't really have, he has 6 damage in play, and he's getting to the point where the Druid deck can start playing big things. You need to have, I think, a more sort of significant material advantage or board presence advantage, but if you're just going to go to be pushing that tempo here. And Strifecro recognizes this. He's like, okay, I can't let you just keep getting extra cards from this Northshire Cleric, and does manage to actually have his best turn of the game so far, where he actually is able to neutralize one of Dog's threats and develop his own.
Absolutely. And this kind of goes to show it's one of priests with cards are scary. They have so many options. They can do so many things with the cards they have, with the healing abilities, the buffing abilities, Holy Novas, Light Bombs. They can really understand and control the board the way they want to. So Strifecro has to get rid of that opportunity, has to get rid of the opportunity of card draw.
And now Dr. Boom is green. At least allegedly, I can't tell. I'm colorblind, as are you. We are actually just a collection of casters who just can't actually know when to play Dr. Boom here. But
Dr. Boom,
Strifecro does know. He knows.
Okay. Exactly. From now on, we'll be able to tell which players are colorblind and not. But Dr. Boom lights up and plays it. We'll be like, oh, it must have been green.
All right,
That's how it works.
But here, Dog is actually, he's in a position where he doesn't really care that much about that Dr. Boom. I mean, he could use his resources, trade in a couple of minions and Blackwing Corruptor it, and then just still send the rest at face, or potentially even take out one of those boom bots as well.
Exactly. He does have 13 damage on board, plus the Blackwing Corruptor. It would put Strifecro at 4 health. Do you think he just goes the face route at this point?
It's interesting because if Strifecro did have, say, Savage Roar, having all those minions with multiple boom bots and a Dr. Boom in play is actually kind of threatening to Strifecro's board. But looks like he is choosing to heal up his guy. I think he is going to take out boom bots here.
Okay.
Yeah,
and it hits for 1. That is a perfect roll for Dog here.
Yeah. I like this direction that Dog is taking. He's putting on a lot of pressure, but still, yeah,
and it hits a 1/1 Northshire.
I thought I saw the glow around the Wormrest agent go away, and I thought that it had died to the boom bot, but it was because Dog had already queued his action. So now, I mean, Strifecro, he's under a ton of pressure. He's only at 10 health. He's going to need to. It looks like he's going to have to Wrath and Force of Nature, and not quite clear this board still.
But he will actually wipe off a lot of pressure here.
Yeah,
he will be able to kill off the Blackwing Corruptor. And do you think he kills off the 3/1 or the 2/2 here? It looks like he wants to just reduce the damage.
Yeah, which is totally understandable. And here, we see Blackwing Corruptor plus that Twilight Whelp take out Dr. Boom, I have to imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're getting to the point that Strifecro is actually behind on all axes of the game here. He's behind materially, he's behind on board, he's behind in health. So it is going to be very difficult for him to come back into this game.
Absolutely. This Emperor Thorsan, I have to imagine, is coming down. Oh, but it looks like Strifecro may go with the Druid of the Claw in order to contest the 5/4 on board. But that Ysera that's in Dog's hand, Druids cannot deal with a 12 health minion.
It is very difficult for Druids to actually defeat that card once it hits play.
And I can't imagine that Strifecro is running Mulch in his deck.
It is not. Mulch is not a card that you see very often.
What's your opinion on Mulch as a card?
Mulch is interesting. The problem with Mulch is that it doesn't really have the impact that you want in a lot of games in terms of being able to clear things that you want better than things that already exist. You know, if you're playing and we see Strifecro pick up exactly the card that largely replaces cards like Mulch, Big Game Hunter. You know, it's a card. Big Game Hunter is a card that most of the minions that you'd want to kill with Mulch, you can generally Big Game Hunter. Obviously, here is one of them that you cannot. Ooh.
Oh, this Light Bomb is going to take out the entire board.
That is a huge play here from Dog. The Light Bomb, an excellent draw. He's able to remove all of Strifecro's minions, and because Ysera is so back heavy, you know, she barely gets scathed by the Light Bomb and is able to stay around with 10 remaining health.
And again, Strifecro is fighting for his life right now. He's stuck at 7 health. Even though Ysera is only doing 4 a turn, that'll still pick away. And for all he knows, that Ysera may have gotten a dream card that could end it. Nightmare would do it. Ysera's Awakening would do it.
I mean, Strifecro, he knows that Dog has picked up 2 cards from Ysera. If either of those are the damage cards, he can just end the game. Dog can just end the game next turn. He also doesn't really have any plays other than, I think, this Force Roar that he just picked up the second part of the combo that really are great either way. You know, even if this game is going to continue past this next turn, he needs to get Ysera off the board. If he's going to try and play any kind of value game, he can't do it if Ysera's alive.
What do you think about this? Actually using the Emperor Thaurissan. This is one of the play-to-win moves. Playing Emperor Thaurissan, using your hero power and going face. That Thaurissan will not die to what is currently on the board, allowing Strifecro the opportunity to get the double combo, the Force of Nature, double Savage Roar, which would have been lethal. It's a long shot, but it might have been a slight shot for him to go for it. But
that's pretty ambitious. But I mean, Force of Nature, the double Savage Roar even wouldn't necessarily. If Emperor did live, you know, he would have to. I actually don't know that Dog would have any spell dream cards for him to win from that position, even if he did pick up the second Savage Roar. But no sort of theoretically what could have happened. What actually happens is Ysera closes down the game, and you know, Strifecro is now down 2-1 against Dog.
Exactly. So Dog does have his last deck. What kind of what is it? So he has Mage.
It was Mage, Priest, and I believe Druid.
There it's Druid.
I believe it's Druid, yep.
So I expect to see a Druid mirror match coming up right here.
That is exactly what we see. So Strifecro sticking with his Druid deck, not going to his Paladin deck.
So let's see who's better at getting Wild Growth.
And Dog, I think, has actually been saving up his Wild Growths and Innervates for a while. He during the ATLC finale, had so many opening hands that, you know, he mulliganed the entire hand and then just had a fistful of 6-drops. And it looks like he's got those Innervates in the bank for a while. And now this double Innervate Emperor hand.
That's interesting.
It is interesting because obviously Emperor is a powerful card to play early, but it's not very powerful unless you actually have cards in your hand that it's reducing the cost of.
But keep in mind, it's also a 5/5 minion, so it will likely stay on board at least for a turn or two, especially if Strifecro doesn't get into any ramp cards right now, as we see he doesn't have. What do you expect? Strifecro seems pretty average. You might consider keeping Shade or Shredder. You'd probably toss the rest. What about Dog, though? This is a really hard decision. And you have to be a very experienced Druid player to understand what's the best course of action here.
I think I like just keeping all of them. You know, you are able to. Oh no, he looks like he keeps just Innervate.
And we see that Strifecro did in fact find that Wild Growth, and that is going to be a big factor in this game, especially with a curve right now. He's got Coin Innervate into Shade of Naxxramas into Pilot Shredder.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a very, very powerful opening here from Strifecro. He has the Wild Growth, which even more so than Innervate is really a key to these matchups, because if you're able to Innervate something big, very often your opponent will be able to sort of attrition it down over time. But if you're able to get a sustained mana advantage and are able to continually play things that cost more and are more powerful than your opponent, that's really how these games tend to go.
Now, I'd have to imagine that seeing that Ancient Allure in hand, Dog probably really wanted to save that Innervate for future turns, but he realizes the fact that Strifecro coined out the Innervate, or coined out the Wild Growth, that he expected a Shade of Naxxramas. So he realizes that he has to get a board presence. He has to use that Innervate right now and get that Pilot Shredder out to start pushing damage.
Shade of Naxxramas is an interesting card because it essentially puts kind of a clock on the game. That if the game goes slowly, the player who has Shade of Naxxramas is incrementally just gaining this big edge. And in particular, in a matchup that involves, you know, Druid decks, which is typically where you see Shade of Naxxramas these days, it not only is itself sort of this scary clock to the game, but particularly in combination with Force of Nature and Savage Roar, can sometimes put your opponent in a position where they literally just die from 30 life.
So here we see Strifecro actually has a number of options. One of them is obviously use the Wrath and then either the Innervate or Hero Power to possibly kill off the last part of the Shredder. He could use the Keeper of the Grove to silence the Piloted Shredder and actually either wipe it off or just leave it as is, or he could just play his own Shredder in response. This is actually a very hard choice because all three are very viable decisions.
Yeah, this is definitely a significant sort of crossroads for Strifecro in terms of how he decides to approach this game. Given that he does have the Ancient of Lore in his hand, I like getting the Wild Growth here because it does open him up to play either Shredder or Keeper next turn and still have the option of using his hero power. As well as building him up to play Ancient the following turn. So the double Wild Growth from Strifecro is definitely giving him a pretty significant sustained advantage here over Dog. And Dog does get a kind of interesting minion from the Shredder in the Blood Mage Thalnos. He does have Swipe and Wrath, but unfortunately for him, that Shade of Naxxramas has grown just too big, even with spell power, for him to take it out.
Absolutely, and this is perfect for Strifecro. Going into 6 mana here with 2 4-drops in his hand, he's most likely going to use one of the two, leaving him with a 2 mana left in order to use his hero power to actually kill out that Blood Mage. So even though it does seem nice in general, especially when Dog's hand has Swipe and the Wrath, having that 1 health is really not all that good. It allows Strifecro to continue this board advantage that he's managed to take a hold of.
And this is sort of what we were talking about a little bit earlier. Strifecro, he has been able to use the sustained mana advantage that he has gotten from his 2 Wild Growths to not only be able to play larger minions, but actually also use additional mana to interact with Dog's board. Dog, he got out that Piloted Shredder, but now that Piloted Shredder is dead, and the advantage that he gained from Innervate is gone. And Strifecro may be at 22 health from a couple of hits from that Piloted Shredder, but he has a substantial board advantage.
And that's the problem. Obviously, Dog wanted to take the aggressive route in terms of getting the Innervate out to kind of match up with the Shade, but the problem is he's had very few follow-up turns, and that's the issue when you have to use the Innervate so early. It's great if you can follow it up with either Wild Growth play or curve into Shade, another Shredder, Druid of the Claw. But look at his hand. He's picked up combo, he picked up a Wrath, he picked up a second Swipe. Now he's just fighting to get back, and especially with Strifecro having this Ancient of Lore to continue the card draw, Dog's going to have a hard time finding a way to get back into this.
These are the Druid draws that I have come to know Dog for here. He just has all kinds of spells and nothing to actually do on curve. I mean, his best bet, I think, here is just, he's going to go with Wrath. He really needs to do something to interact with this board, get rid of the Shade here. It's interesting. I'm kind of curious. He could have played Swipe there. And while Swipe is a more powerful card in the abstract, it does enable him, if he keeps Wrath, to actually play Wrath in addition to another card in a future turn. It's just more mana efficient. But now, speaking of mana efficient, Strifecro does Dr. Boom on turn 7. Well, not even turn 7, turn 5.
That's a pretty good Dr. Boom.
He's got 7 mana, but this is turn 5. He plays Dr. Boom, and as we've been saying, that's a very powerful card when you're able to play it anytime, really.
Swipe Doomsayer time.
Yep.
Annoyatron.
Ooh,
that's actually a very good one for Strifecro.
Annoyatron is actually a pretty significant card from that Shredder here. It's able to protect even from, say, Force Roar. Dr. Boom being able to be killed in any kind of combat-based fashion.
And again, we go back to Strifecro's hand. I'm sure Dog is just hoping that Strifecro has dead cards in his hand, but that Ancient of Lore is the perfect card. It fills back your hand and it gets you a 5/5 minion on board. Just one more thing for Dog to try to deal with.
Yeah, and now, as we were saying in the last game about Strifecro being behind on every axis, now Dog's the one who is behind. He's behind on board, he's behind in cards, he's behind in health. He is going to have a very hard time actually coming back in this game, and I think this is actually going to be it.
Absolutely.
Strifecro has the Force of Nature plus his board position that's just going to finish this game.
Exactly. He does have the 13 damage on board right now, along with
he just has it all. He just has every last bit.
He just wants to go for it all.
For the rub-ins, I'm just going to do 7,000 damage. I'm actually going to kill you next game, too.
I gotta say, I love Strifecro's version of BM. He doesn't beat you; he destroys you.
I just want to really rub it in that you did not only lose this game, you got crushed.
Absolutely, but at the same time, he's always very professional about it.